4-5 Commando was on post Northern Ireland leave when the call to arms came, which actually was on a Wednesday morning at about 11 o'clock. But we'd been the spearhead battalion, so we had an extremely good recall system, and that went into action. By the Friday night, I was in Turkey with my R group, actually sleeping by an extremely noisy runway. And on the Saturday morning, I was in Salopi, which is in East Turkey, on the Syrian, Turkish, Iraqi border, being briefed by the US Army who had set up their base there. At the same time, although I didn't know it, X Company was on the move down to the airhead back in the UK. On the Saturday afternoon, I hitched a lift in a passing US helicopter and went to call on General Jay Garner for the US Army, who commanded most of the land forces there, and Colonel Jim Jones, US Marine Corps, who commanded 26 MU, and who actually had the troops on the ground. And it's worth here just noting our command and control arrangements. I can't remember being told to report to Jay Garner. I can't remember being told to come under US command. But Andy Keeling, who had briefed Garner previously, was now in the UK briefing ministers. So we were all over the place. And frankly, we just had to get on with it. Garner said to me, "What have you got?" And I said, "Well, I've got an infantry battalion in the air, sort of." And he said, "Come back and see me when you've actually got some real people," which I thought was pretty sensible. On the way back to Salopi with Henk de Jager, my ops officer, I decided that I didn't want to go to Salopi. I didn't want 4-5 Commando to fly in there. I wanted us to be as forward-based as possible, in amongst the Americans, and more importantly, right in the face of the Iraqis. So on the way home, we found an old school, which actually had a big wall around it. It had been thoroughly trashed by the Iraqi army, but everything was. And we decided that's where we should base ourselves. And the following morning, which was a Sunday, funnily enough at 11 o'clock, so literally 4 days after I'd received that first phone call, X Company dropped out of the sky in 2 very large Chinook helicopters, landed on the road in the warm spring sunshine, much to the delight of the UK press corps, who were there in some force, might I say, and probably the surprise and dismay of the Iraqi army that was dug in the hillside just above us. 4-5 Commando was involved in, I think, 5 key actions. The first I've already described, which was getting on with it, linking up with the Americans, and if they asked us to do something and we could do it, we did it. The second, I think, most important action, the second day after they'd arrived and they'd cleaned up the base, X Company sent their first patrol under Second Lieutenant Stuart Birrell towards the mountains. They didn't have any maps. I think they had some company radios, but we didn't have any maps. But you could see the mountains. And Birrell was told, go up into those mountains, find the Kurds, and tell them it's safe for them to come home. On their way, they bumped into an extremely heavily guarded Kurdish roadblock, who said, you can't go any further. So Birrell says to his patrol, go back to Captain Mason and tell him what's happened. I'm going on to see their leader. And the leader happened to be a man called General Ali, who was actually quite important, although we had no idea. Birrell meets Ali, who's so impressed that somebody should actually come and see him, that he looks after him very well, sends him back the next day in the back of a ute, in the back of a truck, surrounded by very, very heavily armed Kurdish freedom fighters. I then send Birrell with Brian Sage, who's my commander to IC, who had somehow appeared, to see General Garner to report on what has happened. Garner then gets in touch with Ali. They meet, And that's all part of the process of persuading the Kurds that it was safe to come home. So Birol's patrol was actually very important. And Birol's action, I thought, was absolutely brilliant. The second major event was taking over Zaku. Zaku was the only big town in the area. It might have had a population of something like 100,000. There might have been 4,000 there when we arrived. I was instructed by Ghana to take it over. The Americans had already issued what they call a démarche, which was to tell the Iraqis to get out of town. We had 4 companies. We flooded the town in Northern Ireland fashion, patrolling in our green berets, popping up here and there, shepherding the Iraqi army out. And then we found the secret police and we had to winkle them out. And it took about a day and a half before we were able to declare Zaku free. And that was a major event. That was a major first step forward. Our fourth, I think, big contribution, we were by now back under command of the Commander Brigade. We were ordered to move east, something like 100 miles. We were going over country about which we knew nothing. We didn't really know where the Iraqi army was. I had a very good US Marine Corps Anglico team with me, who periodically would magic F-16s and attack helicopters, Apaches out of the sky. And any Iraqi units that were there got out of the way pretty quickly and just literally melted away. That hunt march, which was a long day, took us to where we were to be for the rest of our time, and we then established our bases. And the fourth key point was one of the very few firefights, if not the only one. Lance Corporal Green from Zulu Company was in an overt OP, very overt, overlooking one of Saddam Hussein's palaces, which is a horrible place, great big wall around it. And suddenly he comes under fire. Green had prepared for this. He had very good fire positions. He won the firefight. There were some casualties, and the whole thing stopped. But that was important for 2 reasons. Firstly, it showed the Iraqis that if they stepped out of line, we were not going to back down. And secondly, as well as showing the Kurds exactly the same thing, it gave them confidence in what they called our little bullets. They weren't great fans of the 5.56 bullet. They couldn't see how it could be anything like as effective as their Kalashnikovs. But Green's firefight was certainly over 400 meters, and he decisively defeated Iraqi firepower. So I think those 5 points really are early linking up with the Americans and coming straight under their command, Birol's patrol, the Zaku operation, our move east, and Green's firefight really summarized 4-5 Commando's contribution. We were there for 2 months. We spent a great deal of time receiving Kurds as they were passed on from 40 Commando, who of course were up in the mountains, in amongst the Kurdish camps. As they came back down from the mountains, we then escorted them to their villages and gave them the assurance that they were safe to go home. And I think that was our contribution. Thank you.